Mount is at the moment is we're essentially a marketplace that can take anything you might own, like you mentioned, whether that be a bike, a scooter, paddleboard, kayak, literally the sky is your limit, and we turn it into a rentable amenity. So that way, whoever's coming to your piece of private property, whether it be a multifamily unit, it's a resident, or it's a short-term rental and it's a guest, they can seamlessly use the Mount app to basically rent whatever they need wherever they are.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 383. My guest today has found a technology solution to help rental property owners and short-term rental hosts add new streams of income and boost their profits. Madison Rifkin is the CEO and founder of Mount, a startup company that is focused on enhancing the guest and resident experience by enabling rental property owners and short-term rental hosts to effortlessly and securely provide adventure-filled memories via equipment rentals such as bikes, e-bikes, scooters, kayaks, paddleboards, surfboards, snowshoes, and beach equipment. Maddie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Happy to be here.
Tell us about Mount and what it is and how you came to bring it to the public.
What Mount is at the moment is we're essentially a marketplace that can take anything you might own, like you mentioned, whether that be a bike, a scooter, paddleboard, kayak, literally the sky is your limit, and we turn it into a rentable amenity. So that way, whoever's coming to your piece of private property, whether it be a multifamily unit, it's a resident, or it's a short-term rental and it's a guest, they can seamlessly use the Mount app to basically rent whatever they need wherever they are. The premise was we're in a new era coming out of COVID, where a majority of the new generations want to live, work, and travel kind of all at the same time. So people aren't really having leases anymore. They might be owning a suitcase or a backpack, and that's probably about all of the possessions they have. And they're traveling as much as possible. And so when you're in that new environment, that's really where Mount comes into play, because you don't want to be traveling with your bike. That would be very hard to get on a plane. And so, it's still user behavior. You've been riding your bike this entire time, your entire life, but you're in a new destination. How on earth are you going to get a bike? Maybe you're there for a month. So that's really where Mount comes into play, is like whatever you need, we have it on our marketplace and it's available to rent. So that's in essence what we're up to. And we've rooted it in private property so that the owner of the property can get this new revenue stream as well, offer a better guest, tenant, resident experience. And it's a kind of rounded out platform for everyone.
Let's talk about the revenue stream. And by the way, we're not just talking for short-term rental hosts. This is an idea or a technology that will work for rental property owners too, right?
It will. Yeah. So the stipulation is that the amenity experience adventure package, whatever you want to call it, has to be hosted on private property, because otherwise, the city government gets involved, the town, the regulations. But this way you're keeping ownership over it, but it could be any piece of private property.
What kind of revenue stream are we talking about? Like, bring us through some scenarios that your clients have enacted at their own properties.
So I can break it down a few ways. For the short-term rental industry, that one's pretty straightforward, because your property would probably be hosting electric bikes, golf clubs, beach equipment, the stuff that travelers want. And so you'd probably average about 10 rentals a month, maybe more, depending on your marketing tactics. And your bikes can pull in anywhere from $40 to $100 a day, depending on your location. So that extra revenue stream for that short-term rental property could be the equivalent of adding occupancy of 2 or 3 extra nights. So it is pretty meaningful. When it comes to other pieces of private property and also short-term rentals, really a lot of the value of Mount isn't actually in the revenue stream. I mean, it is generating money depending on who the host of the amenity is, but really it's a product differentiator. Mount also offers an insurance product that covers our entire platform and the listers. So you actually can offer these type of experiences and amenities, and your liability is covered, which is pretty much novel to our industry. So, I guess it depends at which way you want to look at Mount and what the value is for your specific use case and need.
I'll give you an example that we were talking about at the conference is that Jeremy and myself, we have a Airbnb boutique hotel in downtown Muskegon. And the idea of offering e-bikes that you can rent from our property and are within close proximity to the Lake Shore Drive, like ride your bike along the path along Muskegon Lake. That's an incredible amenity that we can offer. And it's a differentiator too. Like, do you see that kind of thing happening a lot? And can you give us some examples?
I do. And actually, I'm remembering that conversation now and was fascinated by the property you guys had, because I think it's the perfect use case. Where Mount works really well is when you have a big congregation of people at the same property. So an example is like a boutique hotel. We actually work with a hotel in San Diego right now, one being the Fairmont, kind of off the beaten path a little. It's a very beautiful hotel, lots of biking terrain, and they put in 6 electric bikes. They couldn't figure out the insurance piece, the payment piece, like they didn't know how that all worked. And that's really where Mount stepped in for them. They actually already had the e-bikes. They were just afraid to offer them. So we stepped in for them to take care of that. And now every guest at that hotel is getting the opportunity to rent those bikes and really explore the whole acreage of that property and the surrounding area. Another example, there was a inn up in the mountains of Colorado. That's actually where Mount was first started, because I'm from Denver. And it was in summertime. If you're familiar with Colorado and the mountainous towns, they're very bikeable, walkable, just a great experience. And so they wanted to put in electric bikes at their inn, similar to what you guys were thinking of doing, so that their guests could use it. But because it's private property and Mount works in a way where anyone else can come and rent them as well, they were actually encouraging the rest of the town to come and rent the e-bikes as well. So that way people could get brand exposure to their new inn they just opened, and the town could really get behind what they were doing in a local type of capacity.
I think the mindset shift there is that it's not just for your residents or your guests, but it's for the public as well. And the more accessible it is to the public, the more revenue you can drive through the rental experience.
Exactly. And we have customers of all types. I mean, we have customers who want to offer these type of amenities, but bake it into their nightly price as opposed to charging on per the hour, per the day. Mount works in that way. You just pay a different type of pricing structure. And then it also works for the person like yourself that wants to take it basically all the way and put in a bike program for your community that's run from your property. So it's really up to the customer and how they want to use it. It's actually similar. I think I would look at it as the origins of Airbnb, where they started, which was putting a blow-up mattress in your apartment and renting that out. And then you've had these people who come in and professionalize the industry. And you have pretty much 70% of people that own short-term rentals, Airbnbs, are now investors. And they're doing it as a business. So I think Mount works very similarly in that we've created this base layer of hey, here's how we think you're going to use it. And then the customer comes in and uses it in a completely different way.
There is this trend, and I know that I'm stepping outside of Mount here for a moment, but there is this trend to make your amenities accessible to the public. And I'm specifically thinking about EV charging stations, because those are becoming more and more necessary for travelers. Well, we're looking at some of our developments putting in publicly accessible EV chargers, because the model that we're looking at is you're getting paid per use. So why not open it up to as many users as possible? And I think Mount is really right in line with that way of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, everyone's looking for a property and product differentiation, because, in the multifamily world, everyone has the same amenities these days. You can put in a rooftop pool, you can put in a gym, but how do you separate yourself from the building next door? And right now, everyone's fighting for occupancy and leases, and they want to fill the building. So I think that's really where Mount comes into play is, use this as a property differentiator and get, our community of people that use Mount and love it into your buildings.
What are all the different types of amenities that you've seen Mount associated with?
So if you go on our website, scroll close to the bottom, there's a animated photo that basically says, I think it says share in the journey or list to your heart's content. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, it says nothing is too small or too big to be shared, and it flashes with different images. I think that really encapsulates Mount's breadth of what you could list, because it has your classic bike, your kayak, your paddleboard, and then it has some of the uncommon ones, which you might not think about, like a grill, a computer, I'm just looking at it right now, a tent, all this stuff that you might have bought and you maybe use once a year. And you're like, well, damn, I could probably get some extra money from that. Someone else would want to use it. let's encourage other people to rent from me instead of buy it and then have it sit in their closet. So that's the premise of Mount. To this point, we've been pretty strict on what you can list. So if you actually go create a Mount account, there's a limit to what you can list and what we'll accept. So it's electric bikes, scooters, paddleboards, kayaks, beach equipment. I want to say firewood is on there now. There is a custom button that allows you to put in your creative ideas. That will not go live until we vet it and make sure it's, works with our insurance and stuff like that. But we've had some people get very crazy there. So someone put in like a VW Bug. We don't actually do cars, but I thought that was really interesting. An RV camper, a podcast studio was brought up, a hookah pipe, which we definitely said no to. So people get really creative, and it's fun to see kind of their ideas drive Mount forward.
How does Mount work specifically? I mean, you can think of the EV bikes and think, okay, the Lime scooters or the other brands that are out there, and you have the little barcode that you scan on your app. Is Mount the same concept? I mean, how exactly does it work?
The origin story of Mount does come from the micromobility and the scooter world. So the product works in a similar fashion where you go and list your amenity like you would be listing an Airbnb property, a boat for rent, really anything. It walks you through a few steps, you upload photos, and then at the end, it asks you to order a QR code and a lock, because that's what makes your amenity rentable. So for a normal bike, for example, you would go put the QR code on that bike. You would also lock it. So you could either lock the frame to the wheel so the guest can't move it, lock it to a bike rack, whatever you want to do. And then when someone wants to rent your bike, they'd use the Mount app, open it, they'd scan the QR code, and then that takes them into the flow of the rental. So it asks them how they want to pay for it, by the hour, by the day, by the week, like really up to the host of that bike, what pricing structure they want. And then it'll ask them to sign a terms and conditions rental sheet, just absolving us from some of the liability that goes with renting this gear. And then also it will ask them, or actually that might be it. I think that's it. And then it starts their rental. So when they start their rental, it gives them the unlock code. So now they can use the bike. They can do whatever they please with it, ride it, take it wherever, but they can't end their rental and stop paying until they are back at that parking spot, invisible fence area. They've locked it back up, take a photo and click end rental. So it is very similar process to if you were renting a scooter.
And you could do that with a bike, just a regular pedal bike, because I know with the scooters, well, they don't start until you paid for it and it's all set to go. But Mount works whether you have an engine on it or not.
It does. Yeah. The key is that QR code in the lock. So the lock can be any type of combination lock. You just have to put it as a barrier to using the amenity essentially. And then that QR code gives the access to it.
So walk us through that same concept with, say, like firewood. If you're renting firewood or selling firewood, really, because you're not going to rent firewood, but if you're selling firewood, how would Mount actually work in that case?
Yeah, so the firewood would be a purchasable amenity is what we call that one. And we have suggestions for how you should be, I guess, having your guest or whoever purchase it. We typically recommend putting it in one of our boxes. We call them amenity boxes. You can fill it with pretty much anything. It has a lock on it. And then when they scan the QR code, they unlock it and they get access to the contents. So in this case, they would get access to all that firewood, maybe even a fire starter, stuff like that to help them with their campfire.
Whatever it is that you're going to attribute Mount to, it's got to be lockable in some way.
Exactly. Yeah, because otherwise there's no really barrier to them or anyone really using your amenity. I mean, if you left a bike on the side of the road, it wasn't locked, chances are someone would probably take it or use it or do something with it.
A lot of rental property owners are thinking, well, I could rent out my bike. I could sell firewood, but why do I need Mount? Like, what value does Mount bring that makes it easier and a better amenity for residents or guests to access?
I think the value of Mount is distilled down to three pieces. The first is the insurance aspect. I think a lot of the market is very uneducated when it comes to insurance, and it's not their fault. It's just a very big gray area where you think property insurance will cover your amenities if you're offering e-bikes, golf carts, whatever it may be. But it is a very big gray area because if you offer a bike and they leave the property and hurt themselves or hurt someone else, there's a big chance your property insurance will not cover you in that lawsuit or even that claim. So that's one of the values we bring. Our policy was built specifically for that piece where they're leaving your property, they're on a Mount amenity and they hurt themselves, they hurt someone else. damage something, that's where our policy comes into play. So that's a huge, unique value add Mount brings. The second is the payment processing. So Mount collects all payment. We remit payment back to you as the host. So that way you don't have to chase them down and ask them for their Venmo. You don't have to go ask them for cash. Like that is the normal process right now if you want to try and offer anything as an upsell. So that would be the second piece of value of Mount. And the third piece is more of this management portal and these tools we've built for you so that you can see when something's being rented. It'll alert you if someone reported damage. It tells you kind of what state the amenity was left in with photos. You can communicate with the guest. Like it does all this stuff that otherwise you'd probably just kind of trust that, hey, I put this bike here. It's usable. It might not be. I don't know what condition it's in. Mount kind of answers all those questions for you.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. What about just the installation of all of this? Does Mount help with that, or do you have to hire a handyman to come and put the box together and put the locks in place and put the barcode on the bikes?
As of right now, Mount does not handle that. We are a pure software company. We can recommend you a handyman. I mean, TaskRabbit is actually great for this because you can hire someone for $20 for the hour to just set it up. But yes, you do have to take, time out of your day to put the QR code and the lock on the amenity and then station the amenity at your property. No matter what type of property, you are going to need some marketing collateral saying, hey, you can rent this, scan this QR code to download the Mount app. Probably some guest communication or resident communication, just alerting them that this is something they can use. So it's not fully self-service, set up in 5 minutes type of deal. It will require some effort. But once that effort is put in, that's when the joy happens and that you are starting to see the money flow in, and it's a lot less time ongoing than it is upfront.
What is the profit share? How does Mount make money? How does the property owner make money?
So as of right now, Mount gives 100% of your revenue back to you. So if you set your rental price at $10 an hour, that's what you're keeping. We actually built into the software the ability for Mount to upsell your price to that person that's renting the amenity. So we upsell at 20%. So a $10 an hour rental would actually be bought at $12 an hour. And that's where our money is coming from. So we're not taking a cut of yours. And that way we both can predict revenue pretty seamlessly. The one thing we do charge you as the amenity lister is $15 a month for every amenity when it's active. And that really covers our SaaS fee, the insurance, everything you get by working with Mount. That is what that fee covers. But if you have bikes and you're in Michigan and it's the dead of winter and no one's riding them, you won't be charged anything. It's only when it's active.
So if you have 4 e-bikes, you're going to spend $60 a month just in service charge, really, plus nothing because you're charging the end user that additional amount.
Exactly. So if you set your rental price at $15 an hour and each bike gets one rental, you're paid off, and then whatever you make that month is profit.
Maddie, I love the concept amount. I love the idea that you're. And for those who don't know what Lime is, or what are some of the other businesses out there that rent the e-bikes or the scooters?
Bird is one of them. Those are the two big competitors. I mean, Uber kind of has a bike share, scooter share program. At least they did. Lyft also had one, but Bird and Lime are the two biggest.
And so if people aren't familiar with those, it's like if you're in a larger city, quite often it's a larger city where you can rent a scooter and get to where you're going within the city without having to drive a car or a bike. What I love, Maddie, is that you've taken that concept and you've now put it in the hands of the rental property owner as opposed to the business, the startup business that's probably making most of that profit. And you've also made it so that it's not just one or two products, it can be just about any type of product, which I kind of like how you've democratized it and opened it up to a lot more profit potential and streams of income for the rental property owner. Brilliant concept. And I want to kind of switch gears to you as an entrepreneur and startup business owner. How did you come up with this concept? And where did you get the tools to actually put it into action and start up a business like you have?
The Mount origin story, I guess, really starts with me creating my first bike lock when I was 12 years old. That's kind of what set me on this path of entrepreneurship and wanting to create a startup. I was fortunate enough to go to a school that had an innovation program, kind of after hours, where you'd spend, 3 or 4 hours every day building your product. And then at the end of the semester or school year, you pitched to a panel of people. And those panel of people ended up awarding me a fully funded patent. So I had that kind of in my back pocket and knew I needed to be an entrepreneur and CEO. I kind of just knew that growing up. And so set myself up to do that. I went to Northeastern University and studied entrepreneurship. They had a good track record with founders. And that's when it used to be called Mount Locks. That's when we officially started. And we actually were a bike lock company. That's what led me into the micromobility industry, where I learned everything I needed to know about scooters, how that process worked, how asset management worked, and then took that into the short-term rental Airbnb industry. So that's how Mount started. We didn't really get our start as this type of software company. We've only been around doing that for about a year, just over. And that's kind of when we were able to raise funding. We got a team put together. Our first software product is out in the market now. It's being tested and used. So on our way to becoming a bigger company, but it took a while to get there.
Can you talk about that funding process? Like you have this business concept, you're raising money. How does that work in the startup business world?
It's really interesting because growing up and hearing about entrepreneurship, I thought everyone just raised funding from VCs. And I just thought that's how it was. And I'm like, yeah, everyone's getting $1 million checks. Like that just makes sense. But it took Mount, I want to say, or myself really, over 2 years to figure out how to properly raise funding and build a business that was actually venture backable. I think that's a big thing to know. When Mount was the bike lock company, no one would fund us. And one, hardware is really hard to build. Like that definitely makes sense. It wasn't very venture backable, but because of that, Mount became really scrappy. I ended up entering every entrepreneurship competition I could across colleges. I was in Arizona State University's competition. Like it spanned far and wide. I think I won over like $100,000 in grants and stuff for Mount. So that's how we were originally funded, because we couldn't get funding from...
For Mount, the lock company, or Mount, the technology company?
Mount, the lock company. And then when we started slowly pivoting and getting closer and closer to the software company, to a point where I could articulate what the software company was going to be doing, our vision 10 years out, and what we wanted to do to change the world, that's when we became venture backable. And that's when large VCs started circling us and were like, hey, I think I want to invest. And then that's when I started to entertain those conversations and actually raise an official round of funding. So definitely a very interesting process. And obviously when the VCs join the table, they want you to become a unicorn. That's why they're investing. So a lot of pressure on Mount to grow.
Are you able to share how you pitched and sold the concept of Mount to VCs, venture capitalists, in order to raise that money?
Yeah, honestly, I attribute a lot of that pitching success to a startup accelerator we went through, my co-founder and I, called Blue Startups. And they had you really focus in on like, what is your actual value as a company? How are you going to get there? And then what does it look like in like 5 years? And they had us put that together in a 5-minute pitch. And then because I went to Northeastern, I became pretty good at giving pitches. Like they put you kind of through the ringer when it comes to public speaking. So I had that in my back pocket. And then when I pitched in front of a few investors, I was able to create FOMO in 5 minutes to the point where they basically had their checkbook out and were ready to write that first check. So yeah, I mean, for them, it's just, communicating the vision, making sure you have a plan of execution and then starting to execute it.
Where is Mount now and where will you be in 5 years?
So Mount just raised our seed round, which means we're still tweaking the product and really figuring out what it's going to take to become a massive company. But we have customers and people are wanting to use the product. Where we'll be in 5 years, if we execute on the vision I have for Mount, the face of travel as we know it will most likely be changed. The inside of planes will no longer look the way they do because no one will be checking a bag. Everyone will be renting everything they need in destination from the locals. So I think we're creating a world where travelers and locals really have a symbiotic relationship and really want to learn from each other, and maybe a lot more remote working so people can travel and work at the same time.
Walk me through my travels and how I'll be using Mount in 5 years.
Yeah, so we have a lot of Mount travelers that are starting to kind of see the vision and they're like, I want to travel with just a backpack. So they bring their necessities, like a toothbrush, a computer, the bare necessities, we like to call them. And then when they get into their destination or pre-arrival, they'll probably figure out what they need to rent, scooping up that Balenciaga purse they need for that fancy dinner that night, getting a, ball length gown for the wedding they have to attend, maybe wanting a local Hawaiian shirt because that's where you're going. And you're like, why would I buy one just to travel? Or maybe you're going on an adventure in Iceland and you need hiking boots and rain pants and all the gear you need when you go to Iceland that maybe you purchase once and never use again. So it's all of that stuff where it's like, why are we buying single-use travel items when you should be renting them and reusing them? There's
a kiosk in the airport with a lot of Mount boxes that we can unlock to pull out our wardrobe when we arrive.
Potentially, or, the locals are having it at their properties and that's where you're going to find it. So, maybe your Airbnb will come with a fully stocked closet.
I want to know what your favorite hack or app is, and don't say Mount.
The one I really do like is Turo. And I've gotten to use them a lot recently because I live in the city in New York and I don't have a car. Another shared economy app, kind of like Airbnb, but you rent cars. So I find that one very fascinating. Also, I'm newly 25, so up until now, I couldn't rent a car. So Turo was actually super helpful in that regard.
Turo, for those listeners who aren't familiar with it, is basically Airbnb for cars, right? I mean, if you need a car and you don't want to go to a rental car agency, you just pull out the Turo app and choose a car. And then what? You go to that location or it comes to you? How does that work?
Either or. You can ask them to deliver it and you pay an extra fee, or you go to them and pick it up.
Very similar to Mount in some ways, right?
Very, yeah. I'd say we're hopefully the next evolution.
Well, it seems like, because Turo is focused on vehicles, whereas Mount can be focused on anything that can be shared or rented. I love it. How would people find out more about Mount, find out more about you, and or get a hold of you?
I'd say LinkedIn is the best source to get a hold of me. I am on there all the time. If you want more information on Mount, I would go to our website. If you want to create an account to see what it looks like, go for it. We're always looking for product feedback. Or if you want to become a host, do that as well. So that would be the best two ways to find me.
And what is the website?
It's rentmount.com.
I really love the concept of Mount. I've enjoyed talking with you both during this conversation and at the short-term rental conference that we had recently. Very impressed by what you've accomplished. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing it with us.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'm glad we got to meet in Michigan, and this was a blast. So thanks for having me.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
And RCB Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.